Bobby Webster is the GM of the Toronto Raptors. Bobby, welcome back to the show. I think a year ago at this time, were you not in California contemplating what it would be like to win a title? It was about a year ago. Do you go back to that at all, or is there too much to do?
No, it was. It's just such a different set of circumstances. I think if we were in the playoffs, it'd be so top of mind. But even just internally, we started talking about championship week and things going on. 1 year anniversary, and I hate to say, but it wasn't. It hasn't been the top of our mind for a number of reasons. But I saw some of the comments from our players yesterday, and it definitely takes you back there. And hopefully, when the season gets going again, we'll conjure up all those great memories.
What do you, if we were to go back to the day, like what, is there something that sticks out in your mind about the day?
That's a good one. Not the day. Obviously the after. I think it was probably a day like any other. I mean, I remember, always going over the bridge to get to Oracle. You're always so concerned about traffic. Are you going to make it to the game on time? I remember, being on the bus with the team, entering the arena, and all the, crazy Golden State fans there, all their signs up. But yeah, I can't sit here and say anything specific about the day. It was any other day. And I think that's probably what was one of the things that really helped us, have success last year, was just not approaching things like it was anything special, even though it was Game 6 and we came off of a loss in Game 5 and just everything swirling. It was a crazy atmosphere now that I think about it.
Bobby Webster, GM of the Raptors here on Tim and Sid. Did you think you were going back to Toronto for 7? Honestly.
I hadn't watched the game, and I think right when the coronavirus pandemic started, we played all the games, right? And I remember watching Game 6. I hadn't watched it since we won. And there was definitely some points in the fourth quarter. I think we were down in the fourth quarter. And I just remember, thinking like, okay, if we go back for Game 7, like, how do we prepare for Game 7? What's the atmosphere going to be like? And obviously, fortunately, we didn't have to get to that point. But we were down in the fourth quarter of Game 6, and as everybody can remember and attest to how intense those games are, any deficit during the finals, it just seems like a huge mountain to climb and overcome.
Bobby Webster, the GM of the Toronto Raptors, joining us here on Tim and Sid. Restarting a season in the midst of a global pandemic and maybe the greatest civil rights movement of most of our lives, or at least this generation. Do you know where that is in the NBA GM's handbook? Like, there's no, can you look for some sort of anything to tell you how the hell to go about this?
Nope. And I think these are I'm young enough, and like you said, it's definitely for my generation. And I think these are the kind of life experiences and, personal growth that are really important. And, they end up defining you in many ways and defining your views of the world. So obviously trying to be reflective in the moment and learn and grow and use both of them as ways to become better. But yeah, you're not prepared for this. You're prepared to deal with adversity. You're prepared to deal with upheaval. But being in it has been, a unique time. Having both of them at once, obviously being in your house. I have 2 young kids. It's a lot. And I think for those reasons specifically, my mind and a lot of our collective minds have not necessarily been on what happened last year around this time.
Bobby, there's been a lot talked about and written in the last 24 hours, specifically some reports from Woj about certain players in the league having a few more conference calls and asking a few more questions about what this is going to be in Orlando exactly. And is it worth it is kind of the question just from a quarantine standpoint. But later last night, it was also kind of thrown out there that these are not discussions happening among teams that believe they can win. These are not conversations happening with teams that are near the top of their respective conferences. How unified is your group, without mentioning names? Is everyone gung-ho for Orlando? Or do people have concerns? Are they wondering privately whether or not this is the right decision among the Raptors?
That's a good question. And I would say I think everybody is unified in the sense that we want to play, we want to win another championship. But I do think even us personally, right? I mean, when you leave the house, there's hesitation. Do I have my mask on, or do I trust what the store I'm going to? So I think these are just normal. The more I know the reports are out there, but the more we've talked about it over the course of the day, it's okay. Were you ever going to get consensus from 450 players and 30 teams, and then 22 teams, and then you have 6 teams who are on the cusp, and then 16 teams in the playoffs? So there really hasn't been consensus throughout the whole process. So I do think now that it's as we all go through decision making, now that the time is upon us, people start to think a lot more deeply and critically about it. And now it's like, okay, I've been living like this. What am I going to do when I need X? 2 months into the quarantine or 2 months into the bubble, how is that going to work? And I think these are all the things that are coming to light as we see, and people have different opinions on those. But I do think the overriding emotion here is that we want to play, we want to get back, and we think we can wade through these issues.
Have you had to deal with any of your players' specific concerns about returning to play?
I think generally the health, coronavirus is obviously, or COVID-19 is obviously a huge concern. There's a lot of people, there's thousands of people going to one area and, practicing social distancing. There's a can you trust everyone else is also doing it? And to be honest, the racism stuff is huge now. It weighs large too, which is, what are the important issues in the world right now? And are we addressing those in the proper way and in the proper forms? And I do think, the season restart does have a chance to hit on a bunch of these, which is how can you safely operate, amid the COVID pandemic, and is there a way to make a more meaningful impact because of the platform and broadcast of our season restart on the racism and social justice issues?
Bobby Webster, GM of the Raptors, here on Tim and Sid. Are those talks underway, Bobby, from what you have heard up top with Commissioner Silver and those around him in terms of turning this opportunity, in terms of playing, and in terms of social justice issues, meshing them even more than this league has done in the past? And this league's track record for that is pretty good, especially when needed. Have you heard talk of that happening as we approach July 30th or 31st, whenever they get going?
Definitely, and as you guys can imagine, it's been talks internally for the past 2-3 weeks, and so I think with respect to everything is what's the right way. Obviously, people have different ideas about how to go about the change. I think there's huge initial acknowledge the racism, acknowledge the systemic nature of it, take responsibility. We're all in this together, and then let's figure out a way forward together. So those are things we've been talking about. I've learned a ton. I'm sure you guys have learned a ton. We've all learned. I listened to Trudeau this morning, and I thought he was really good on it. So it is a platform, and similar to the other issues, there's not going to be a consensus on the way to deal with it. But luckily enough, there's going to be a lot of time down there to spend on this and to continue to think about it.
Bobby Webster joining us here on Tim and Sid. We've been hearing reports from the hockey guys that they have hope that their players that aren't in Canada might be able to gain some sort of essential worker exemption from the 14-day quarantine, re-entering Canada, or something of the sort. Have you heard anything like this, like we're hearing from the hockey guys?
We're working on it. Obviously, the number one priority is the public health point of view. So I think that's something that, listen, we're going to follow the rules. If if it makes sense to have limited exceptions, I get it, but we're definitely not pushing it in the sense of, we need it. There's obvious bigger issues going on. So yeah, it's something that we're aware of. We're also, planning a different track, which is if things don't change, or if things don't seem best for health and safety in Toronto, is there a way that we can go down to Florida a little bit early and try something down there? So, these are all the things up in the air. This is, unfortunately what it seems, the norm is now, which is you need to be prepared for anything. And so we're doing that.
The initial follow in my head is, if you guys go to Florida, if you go to Orlando, and you make the kind of run that most of the people that are taking in this show want you to make, that would be a heck of a long time in Orlando. Are there plans in place to give your guys a break from the bubble, or will you be hesitant to head to the bubble even if you go to Florida? for a camp?
No, it's a huge point of discussion. Obviously, there's the physical well-being, there's the mental and spiritual well-being. So it's stuff we're talking about with our staff, and we're lucky enough to have, a huge amount of resources to tackle these problems. And so we have mental health professionals. We obviously have, physical, medical staff taking care of the guys' bodies. What it is, and I kind of think back to movies you see, whether it's the Truman Show or something, where you're kind of stuck in this world for a while, and a bit of it is unforeseen, which is what are you going to feel 2 months in and you haven't seen your family, or what are you going to feel 2 months in where you just can't leave this perimeter that's been designated. So these are the things we're thinking about now. How are we planning for it now so that there aren't issues down the line? And inevitably there will be. And what are the amenities? What are the comforts of home? Is there a way, to your guys' point, to have some very limited way in and outside if you go through the quarantine, or have family come visit? But as has been discussed publicly, those all present and create new risks of having now larger exposure. And so it's just the balance of what's the right amount there so that we all don't go crazy.
Right.
Two things, Bobby. One, Truman Show, underrated movie. So underrated. Love that flick. Two, did Marc Gasol lose too much weight?
It's funny. Everyone's asking, right? I'm sure, as many texts as I got, everyone that picture was thrown around. He's in a really good setup. I think he's as we've all gotten into our routines, you probably have some healthy habits, some unhealthy habits. But he's a pro at this point, and he knows what to expect. And, we get to see him on Zoom calls every now and then. So it was a fun few hours to see the rest of the world, or at least the Raptors and Canadian fan base go crazy. But, we know Mark's been taking great care of himself.
Hey, just one more that I want to know, because I'm that kind of geek. If somebody doesn't want to go, can you replace that person on your roster? Like, have those things been talked about internally within the league about how your roster construction will look if, in fact, there are people who have legitimate concerns or health matters that they can address?
It's funny you mentioned, we just had a call on it. So it is a huge point of discussion. Obviously there's a competitive part, which is you don't want to, completely open up everything. It's, I think if you can think back to March 11th, there was some sense of who your team was and what teams you were going to face in the playoffs. Having said that, you don't really know, someone could get sick. There may be additional injuries because of the shortened amount of ramp up time, right? So there's all these things that go into it. So I do think there's going to be some form of roster flexibility. That specific hasn't been determined yet, but if someone does get sick, can you replace that player? What protocol does that player have to go through to be able to even get into the bubble, right? So there's all these things that are going through, but I do imagine that there will be some form of flexibility and expansion of rosters to deal with all the unforeseen situations. And obviously you wouldn't want to have a case where a team couldn't play because they don't have enough healthy bodies.
Right. Are some of those free agents, or would they all be G League guys?
I think that's too is what's the pool of players. And so that's kind of like, okay, are you just opening the world back up, or are we going to, limit it to a certain set? So all what you said has been discussed, but it hasn't been defined yet.
Okay.
So you're telling me it hasn't yet been defined whether or not you can go to Europe in like a week and get a guy. That hasn't been defined yet. That's potentially up in the air. Sorry. So it hasn't been talked about if whether or not you could sign a free agent from Europe for like 3 weeks.
It has been discussed, but it hasn't. The final answer hasn't been decided on. Correct.
Right. Sorry, I have visions of a lot of possibilities that are dancing in my head.
A lot of people.
As you said that. I mean,
a lot of people.
That opens it up for a lot of people. That's interesting.
Yeah. I think that's exactly the issue, which is, do you want to completely open it up and now there's maybe some competitive issues, or do you want to make it a much more smaller group of players so that we're not trying to tip the balances of, like I said, the spirit of, I think, where teams were, was we're more or less locked in here. Let's give some, if we need healthy bodies, but we're not trying to change the dynamic of what happened.
Right. Bobby Webster, GM of the Toronto Raptors. If you're not a Disney guy, hopefully you are by the time this is over, because you're going to be there for a while. Let's talk again soon, Bobby. All the best to you, and happy. I know it's not your focus, but a lot of your fans this weekend will be focusing. Happy NBA championship anniversary to you and yours.
I appreciate it. We'll save some time this weekend for a cheer. So thanks.